Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America.
On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old. An anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, Andrew talks not just about the American past and present, but also speculates on its future. What, Andrew asks, will be the 21st century fate of this now venerable American republic?
Hello everybody, we're back to books. A few days ago we did a show with Bethanne Patrick, the best read woman in the world, about latest nonfiction. One of the books we talked about was Murderland by Caroline Fraser. And I titled the show, We Get the Serial Killers We Deserve. And we are back with nonfiction. And I wonder, Bethanne, whether we get the titles we deserve. A wonderful title of a new book is called The Dry Season, a memoir of pleasure in a year without sex by Melissa Febos. We certainly get the authors we deserve. She looks ideally suited to writing about a year without sex. Tell us about this book.
I do not even know what that means, Andrew.
Nor do I, of course. I never know anything I'm saying.
Melissa Febos is a really amazing writer, and this is one of her best books yet. She's written Whip Smart about her years as a dominatrix. She wrote about girlhood. That was the title of the book. That was about what it means to grow up female in the United States, and Body Work, which is writing about sex and everything to do with the body. And now The Dry Season.
I mean, what a title. I don't know.
What a great title. What a great title. And she realized at a certain point in her 30s, Melissa Febos did, that she was really in love with romance rather than in love with any particular person. And ultimately, she sort of realized she was using people. She would fix them with this incredible gaze that, made them feel so important and so special.
She looks as if she has the gaze, certainly judging from the photo in the New York Times.
She is pretty hot. And she's
got the tattoos to go with it.
She does. She is just, as she will tell you in The Dry Season, she is all over it when it comes to, this is a book that is genderqueer. I mean, Melissa Febos identifies as a lesbian, but she could probably, transfix a lot of, straight women, straight men, whatever it happens to be. She decided to take time off from sex and romance so that she could learn how to relate to other people in a more honest, authentic way. And at first it was going to be 3 months, and then it extended for 3 more months. And then it wound up being a year. And what she didn't expect was that while she detoxed from, the ways she was behaving badly or from unhealthy ways of being in a partnership, that she started to experience real pleasure in things like food, solitude, music, walking in the rain.
Yeah, I tell you, I got to jump in here.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had there's so many of these kind of books. I gave up the internet for a year and I appreciated reading. I gave up alcohol for a year and I appreciated not being drunk all the time. I gave up smoking for a year. Giving up sex, and the title is wonderful, The Dry Season. Do we really need another book, a whole year without sex? I mean, aren't these rather childish, these kind of books?
I don't think this book is at all childish. This is very much an adult's view of what it means to say, I am not behaving in a healthy way. I need a reset. I'm not just giving this up so that I can do a stunt memoir. I am doing this so that I can be a real partner to someone someday. And in fact, what I love about the book the most is that about month, I don't know, 10 or so, she went to the Associated Writing Programs Conference, AWP, here in Washington, D.C., where I live, and met the poet Donica Kelly, who is now her wife, and they've been together for quite some time. So she doesn't say, okay, I'm going to make it all the way to the last day of the 12th month. She realizes, oh, I've changed a great deal. It's time for me to stop this. So it is less about completing, again, as I said, the stunt, than it is about recognizing when change has happened. And one of the things she says is she wanted to write about women who chose celibacy throughout history. And she does bring some of that up in the book. She talks about Hildegard von Bingen, the famous medieval mystic. She talks about Virginia Woolf, who chose periods of celibacy in her life, both from men and women, because she found it helped her concentrate more on her creative work. But ultimately, Phoebos found that that would have been just too dry an endeavor, too academic an endeavor.
Speaking of dryness, the
Yeah.
dry season. I mean, the subtitle is not a moment, a memoir of pleasure in a year without sex. Is that no fantasies or just?
Oh no, she allowed masturbation and fantasies, but she did not allow dating or sex with another person. So she definitely.
Did she have the internet up too, or did she have the internet?
No, she had the internet. So.
And she traveled. She went on airplanes. She ate fast food. She drank alcohol.
Did all of that. No, she wasn't depriving herself of anything except the idea that since she'd had her first girlfriend at age 15, and she fell into this sort of Western cishet standard of life is only worth living if you are part of a traditional couple. And for her, traditional meant it wasn't traditional because she was with women, but you know what I mean, that you are part of a two-person couple. And she had to learn that life exists beyond that kind of relationship. And she says she liked the idea of choosing celibacy not as a last resort, not as deprivation, but it was a way to grow for herself and to grow her world as well.
Maybe we get the celibates we deserve, Bethanne. I wonder whether, when I saw this in the Times, there was a big piece. She was addicted to romance. She gave up sex. This is a book that almost inevitably was going to get written. I'm sure if you'd made AI, if you'd fed all this into an AI, it would have come up for publishers. What does it tell us about I wouldn't say the cult of celibacy, but certainly the fashion for celibacy amongst young people? The numbers you read, especially amongst young women, are astonishing in terms of their disinterest or disengagement with sexual activity. Does the Phoebos book, does it speak to a broader sociological or socio-sexual tendency in America today?
I'm certainly not the expert on this, but what I will say is that.
Well, you got daughters, although one of them's getting married, so I assume
I do.
One of
them is entering a very traditional relationship. The other one is still single. So it is an interesting time. But to watch them and to watch the people who are a little bit younger than they are as well, I think this is a really tough time for young people who want any kind of relationship. There are so many options, and yet there are also so many dangers. And the dangers aren't necessarily, about STDs or diseases or that kind of problem. They're very emotional. They're very mental. There isn't a whole lot of space for thinking about other people when you're worried that you'll never be able to have health insurance, or when you're thinking, gosh, I'm never going to own a home the way my parents did. And what does that mean? So there's so many pressures on, I would say, Gen Z and Gen Alpha right now in coming to terms with what it means to have a relationship, even if it's just for a couple of hours or a night. What does that mean? What does that do to my life? So again, not an expert, but I can certainly see that this is something a lot of people are going to be thinking about. And this is a book that definitely we get the stunt memoirs we deserve. It's not a stunt memoir. It's not.
Not a stunt memoir, but it sounds like one. Maybe it isn't. I wonder, we live in strange times. We always live in strange times, Bethanne. On the one hand, we have women like Melissa Febos, who clearly is not lacking self-confidence, a woman of great ability and ingenuity. Her new book, The Dry Season, is about her year without sex. On the other hand, we live in an age, of course, of J.D. Vance, of attempts by the Trump Vance people to make Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale the reality of America, yes. Sort of the cult of traditional female identity. How does that play into this book, The Dry Season? Is it a book about female empowerment of strong women like Melissa Febos, or is it a book about post-Roe America, or is it in a weird way simultaneously about both worlds?
I think it's simultaneously. I'm falling into your accent. Sorry about that, Andrew.
No, you can mimic me. I don't mind.
It is about both. It is about female empowerment, but I think what's important to remember is that the women Febos holds up, like Hildegard von Bingen, like Virginia Woolf.
I hope did she also talk, last time we talked about the Sisterhood of Ravensbrück, did she talk about the intrepid band of French women who resisted the Nazis?
Stop it, no! But she does. I think these are women who were really different for their times. These are women who stood out, women who had an idea and ran with it. They were not part of the pack. And so I wonder...
They were lone wolves.
They were lone wolves. There we go. We're going to go to the lone wolves soon. And
now,
not only that,
coming to a lone wolf later, but let's call them lone wolves.
Yes. So I think it does have a lot to say about how we cope with this time in which a lot of rights for people who are transgendered, people who are LGBTQ, people who are in any situation with a woman or are women, there are a lot of things that are.
Is there a Rand? I'm reading or rereading a new biography of Ayn Rand. Is there a Randian quality to Febos's life, A Year Without Sex? Is she presenting herself, maybe not formally, but implicitly, as a kind of heroine, or is there a
no, not at all.
Written into this.
No, and I was going to say, there's not a Randian quality, and there's also not a Randy quality, because
there's certainly no Rand. Yeah.
she's.
You're falling into my vulgarity. If
I am.
You're going to turn it to me.
No, she is not trying to hold herself up as an avatar of what people should do. She has way too much humility and grace for that in her writing. She's trying to say, and I believe I've said this before on the show, but I'll not forget this year, Sarah Smarsh in her Bone of the Bone said, memoir is an offering. And if nothing else, The Dry Season is Melissa Febos's offering to women who are thinking, do I have to keep chasing, this kind of, cycle of partners and sex and dating and sex and then breaking up? Or is it okay to be alone for a while? It's not easy to say, I am deliberately absenting myself from this merry-go-round that young women in particular are put on. But
so of course the wolf element here, a room of one's own, but it's a room of one's own. Certainly, I guess there's a bed in it, but there's no double bed. What about men here? The Dry Season, I mean, I'm not sure whether men are the beneficiaries of this or not. Richard Reeves, of course, has written, and all sorts of other people, about the crisis of malehood. I hear all sorts of anecdotal stories about how young men are sitting in their basements fantasizing about mass murder because women aren't taking them very seriously. What could or should men make of the dry season?
Well, first of all, Melissa Febos is not writing for the male gaze at all in this book. And that is quite refreshing. And
Although she gazes, at least in the time, she gazes back at us in a way that certainly some men would interpret in a sexual way.
She, like I said, she is just amazing. And she's a very compelling person in real life and on the page. But what I was going to say, have you by any chance seen this new Steve Carell TV series called The Patient?
No. Is it good?
Okay, so this is about a guy who lives who knows where, and he is a serial killer. He just cannot stop himself from killing. And Steve Carell's character is his therapist. And
we get the serial killers. Not only do we get the serial killers we deserve, we get the therapists of the serial killers.
We do. And so he kidnaps Steve Carell and chains him to the floor in his family room and says, you have to treat me until I'm better, until I don't do this anymore. And it is such
the Marquis de Sade and chaining people up. Chaining up therapists.
So what you were saying about young men in basements, this is sort of, here's the TV series we deserve, Andrew. It's really bleak and horrible. And that's not, Melissa Febos is like, okay, you guys over there deal with it. This is for people who are female.
So any male listeners of the show, you're not allowed to read the dry.
Sorry, no, not allowed.
And Melissa Febos is not writing for you, but you still have books, men. Don't give up, because there is a new one by a real man, Thomas Chatterton Williams. Summer of Our Discontent, The Age of Certainty and the Demise of Discourse, which is another critique, I guess, of wokeness. Is this the kind of book that men in their basements will enjoy to make sense of a world where they're increasingly marginalized?
This is interesting because Thomas Chatterton Williams, he was named after the English poet Thomas Chatterton, which is kind of morbid since Chatterton.
Yeah, I mean, that's a parental revenge of being called after a poet.
So his father was Black, his mother white, and so this is a critic who is young, very, very smart, and he's both revered and reviled because he does not fall into any particular philosophy. He believes, look, racism is real. Race is not real. Race is a construct, says Thomas Chatterton Williams. And he knows we're far away from a world in which there is, no racism in the United States. But he wants to talk about that. He wants to talk about the fact that, racism really doesn't rest on anything. It doesn't rest on, there's racism of what we call all over the world, right? If someone is different from you, you can be a racist. What he wants to say is that this is a different kind of thing in the United States, and that our devotion to wokeness and our devotion to a certain kind of discourse is, and he says that there's a demise of it, is making us forget the real problems. We think that by saying the right things, using the right adjectives, hyphenating things correctly, that we're doing it all right, but we're not, according to Williams. He says we really need to have a different perspective. And one of the things I like about him is that he has a different perspective himself. He is multiracial. Of course, he's not the only one, but he also married a European woman and has moved to France. And they have children. And, he has that perspective from another continent to add to his American upbringing and education. This is a very smart man who is saying we need to dig deeper. We haven't gotten it right yet. Stop resting on the laurels of DEI. Not everyone is going to like this book. However, I think everyone can learn something from it. Unfortunately, it's not out until August.
Yeah, I
So
was going to say that. I have to admit, from the way you sometimes encourage, when you describe these books, you've read them all, it makes me want to read them. I would be interested in reading The Dry Season. I have to say that your presentation of this book, The Summer of Our Discontent by Thomas Chatterton Williams, which is out in August, has made me completely uninterested. What is he saying?
no.
Hold on, wait. There have been so many books written about this stuff. It's become so boring and actually dated now in Trump's America. What does he say? What is he saying that hasn't been said a million times before?
I think he's saying that we've said everything a million times before. Why don't we try saying something new?
What's he saying new?
Wait, he is saying that we haven't gotten things right, that we still think race is real. We still think that it is all about Black versus white, when it really has nothing to do with that. That calling someone Black or white, those are just terms we apply. We might as well call each other, I don't know, fish and fowl or something like that. He wants to say, we, at the very basic level, we have become certain that we're talking about race, when race is not something that we can rely on. It is not a fundamental truth. This book, to me, is a good companion read to Kevin Young's Bunk from several years back, in which he addresses the American predilection for hoaxes and bunkum and P.T. Barnum-esque kinds of antics, and how those played into racism in America, how those would often set people up in categories where this is the Black person, this is the fat lady, this is the that. And so Williams says, come on, that's not what race is.
It sounds, yeah. I've given you.
I'm sorry, it sounds so boring.
Sounds really boring and saying nothing I haven't heard before. The one book that I think might get more to the if not the heart of the matter, certainly a more entertaining element in all our cultural wars is a book.
Now I'm just so I'm so sad. I have failed as a critic.
Well, you failed with me, which is not a big deal. I'm sure lots of people will be interested in some of our discontent, but it sounds.
But this next one is of course much more fun. I am really glad.
Right. Well, hold on. Let me introduce it. It's called "That's How They Get You: An Unruly Anthology of Black American Humor." And I'm sure that a lot of it's edited by Damon Young. I'm sure some of the comics in this book would make a lot of fun of not just Thomas Chatterton Williams's name, but this pompous book, Summer of Our Discontent, the age of certainty and the demise of discourse, a total turnoff for comics anyway.
Listen, That's How They Get You is anything but boring. This is absolute delight from start to finish. And Damon Young is very, very funny, always has been in his previous work. And listen, there are some great writers in here. Some of them specialize in comedy, some of them specialize in other kinds of writing, but all of these pieces are hilarious. You've got the Karen Rights Act from Matteo Ascaripour. And Matteo wrote Black Buck, which was a fantastic debut novel about a young salesperson in a New York tech company and how downtrodden, the very bottom levels of people are at those companies. It's very, very funny. It's scathing about racism, but at the same time scathing about tech and what that entire business has grown.
Lots of jokes about Karens, I hear.
Well, and that's what I wanted to say. The piece is about Karens, and it's really, really funny. It's about a very unwoke Karen who finds herself one day deported by the the immigrant Karen agency, or I can't remember what they call it, but it's a great takedown of the whole Karen meme. And then there's a wonderful piece by Disha Filia, one of my favorite writers, and it is about a group chat with a mother and 3 daughters. And it's basically about how the mother thinks the father is dead. I don't want to give much more away, but it's hilarious because
and there's something about an updated green book for public toilets.
Yes,
which,
for public toilets.
They should come to San Francisco, because
yes,
we certainly need a green book for public toilets, or a brown book, perhaps.
Yes, we then Nicola Yoon. We don't make princesses in those colors, which is a send up of the entire Disney industrial complex. Roy Wood Jr. has a great piece about crowd work and what it means to show up at, a huge comedy expo kind of thing where they don't really pay you, but they put you in front of, several thousand people.
Sounds like my show.
Yeah, there you go. That's it. It's all about your show. No, this is how they get you, is fun from start to finish. It's very, very incisive and crisp and different, and all of the writers in it are top notch. So check it out.
Strongly recommended, even if I haven't read it. And if you're going to read one about this stuff, read that one over.
Yes,
over
the chatter.
I've been so unpleasant about Summer of Our Discontent that lots of people are going to go and read it now. We talked earlier, when we were talking about Melissa Febos, we talked about lone wolves, and you do indeed have a book called Lone Wolf, Walking the Line Between Civilization and Wildness, not Wilderness, by Adam Weymouth. This sounds like a very intriguing book about real lone wolves, not imaginary ones like Melissa Febos.
So the Adam Weymouth is just really interesting in this book. Kings of the Yukon, it was one of his previous books. He knows a lot about exploration and wildlife and terrain. And so he just had a New York Times op-ed called When Politics, Borders, and Wolves Collide. And one of the things that he says in there, I think is really important, is that he says when he was walking this particular wolf's trail, and I'll get into that in a second, I frequently heard wolves and refugees spoken of in the same breath. I'm not against them, but there's no room for them here, or we were here first. So he is in Lone Wolf very concerned with what it means for wildlife to survive, but also what wildlife species like wolves tell us about what it means to be human and what it means to get from one place to another. So basically, in about 2011, a wolf named Slavc, I think I'm saying his name correctly.
Yes, Slavc, set out from Slovenia.
Yes, traveled just, over 1,000 miles to the Italian Alps in search of a mate, and found a female wolf. And there had been no wolves in that area for I don't know how many years. Now there are over 100. They've actually founded a pack and more. So this is a remarkable story of resilience and change. But Weymouth goes and follows his path to see what it means for something like this to happen, for a species to survive, and for something wild to come back to an area that is so quote unquote civilized. And so Weymouth says, life wants to thrive. And so if we put up a wall, and one of the reasons many wolves didn't cross into the Italian Alps for so many years is the Iron Curtain. They just, there were walls, there were places they couldn't get through. And so he tells the story in his op-ed about this Mexican gray wolf that was blocked by a 30-foot high wall at the US-Mexico border. And he paced for 5 days back and forth. He was collared, and then he turned back. And so what does this mean for a species when it cannot overcome a human obstacle?
Well, speaking of what it means to species, our own species. We're not wolves. Our own species is also, according to some people at least, endangered by technology, not walls, but
Yep.
AI. And Karen Howe has a new book out, particularly important book. I'm actually going to get Karen on the show. So we're going to have a whole show about this book. It's called Empire of AI, Dreams and Nightmares and Sam Altman's Open AI. I've already done a show on Altman, featuring, and the book got reviewed with it by Keach Hagee, called The Optimist. When we were talking earlier, though, Bethanne, you said that this is a very substantial book. This is
Yes.
a lifetime's work, Empire of AI. Karen Howe is not just a journalist, but also a technologist.
She really is. She was at the Wall Street Journal. She now is, contributor to The Atlantic. And for this book, conducted 90 interviews with current and former OpenAI executives, 40 current and former executives and employees at everything from Meta to Microsoft to Google, everything. This is really, it is a life's work, although it will probably lead to a lot more work from Howe, and that is welcome because AI is huge and very hard to scale in our tiny little human brains. And so one of the things that she says about this book is that she originally had wanted to write about AI, artificial intelligence overall, and it was just too big a topic. So she scaled back and decided to also focus on OpenAI because she says you can't really discuss what's happening with AI without talking about Sam Altman and his company. So one of her biggest points is, how do we govern this? AI needs to be regulated. We need to find some ways to come to terms with this, but it could be that things get more and more secretive if we don't have reporters following the development of AI. And ultimately, and this is one of her larger points, this could wind up with AI being sort of a modern version of the, British East India Company, a monolithic sort of colonial world order where certain people have all of the tools and all of the information to themselves and are able to use it, for their own purposes.
Yeah, it's interesting. We did a show on the East Indian Company, a history of it, with William Dalrymple, very important book.
Yes.
John Stuart Mill, as it happened, worked for the East India Company. What about Altman himself? In the show we did with Keach Hagee, the other Wall Street Journal writer who has a book called The Optimist, and I'm putting, this is my interpretation of her presentation, is that Altman will sell anything to anyone if he can. He'll sell, coal to coal miner, coal into West Virginians, ice to Laplanders, sand to people in Saudi Arabia. Does Altman come out in such a troubling way from Empire of AI, or is it less personalized on Altman himself and more focused on the company OpenAI?
It's much more focused on the company than it is, for instance, in our interview about Careless People, about Meta and Google, and Facebook. Sorry, Google, didn't mean to do that. There was a lot about personalities, about Sheryl Sandberg, about Mark Zuckerberg. And this is not that. This is definitely something where she talks about Altman, she talks about what happens, she talks about his firing and his, coming back to the company, but it is in a much more measured, repertorial way. So I think it's a very fair book. He did not cooperate at all with her, no surprise there, but she definitely has used her sources in a very judicious manner so that there are not gaps in the timeline. She's able to say, this is what happened when, and,
So does she talk much about this problem within OpenAI of being simultaneously for profit and non-profit, or does she mostly focus on the technology?
She's I mean, she is talking about, she's this is a book that has a great deal about technology, but also a great deal about business. And that's one of the things that makes it very much worthwhile to read this year, is that, you know, what we talked about a book, I want to say last year, Andrew, that was by a woman who did a lot of early work on AI. I can't remember her name right now. Her book was really about the tech itself, but how very, very well puts together the fact that this is technology that is groundbreaking and probably earth-shaking in many ways, but that it also has to do with money and power. So I think,
Well, but we don't need, I mean, we all know that. The subtitle of the book is Dreams and Nightmares. It's not American Dreams and Nightmares, but Altman and OpenAI are quintessentially American companies and American individuals.
yes.
Does she present this new technology in its hallucinatory kind of way and it's all its utopian promise? Does she present it as a sort of a uniquely American thing?
No, I don't feel like that. I feel that it is something where she's much more focused on OpenAI and Altman than on any sort of American-driven atmosphere or habits of them. On the other hand, when you read all of this and you read about the various, you know, this going on with Twitch, or this going on with Looped, or this going on with, you know, whatever company it happens to be, you can't help thinking about the American drive to do more, you know. And I'm sorry, International Olympic Committee, but faster, higher, stronger, you know. So that is definitely in there.
She's based in Hong Kong. How? And, is there a Chinese angle to this? Does she present OpenAI as, you know, if you want to talk in terms of the Olympics, as the American contestant in the AI race?
You know, she does talk about China, and I would say that with China, this is where what you were just asking about with the American agenda, where this comes through, because most of what she talks about with China in discussing OpenAI and Altman is how they view China as competition, and often antagonistic competition.
Well, much more on this because we're going to get Karen Howe on the show. So that's a good introduction. Finally, Bethanne, all these books, with the exception of Some of Our Discontent, of course, sound wonderful. The Dry Season, Some of Our Discontent, Lone Wolf.
I can't pick them all so well.
That's how they get you, particularly good. And of course, Empire of AI. These are all hot new non-fiction titles. The two books that are missing that I was surprised you didn't include, maybe because everyone's talking about them. I'm curious as to your take, not on Gatsby, but on Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson's Abundance, and Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson's Original Sin, both big-selling books, non-fiction books about contemporary America. Do you have any thoughts on the Abundance book or the Tapper book on Biden?
I will say I considered the Abundance book. I was trying to, you know, dig a little bit more.
Oh, it was a good book, actually. I enjoyed it.
I've heard wonderful things. But Original Sin, I'm sorry, it just doesn't interest me. And perhaps it should. But I think, come on, this is not what we need to be talking about right now on the left. This is, I don't know. It's not for me. I know it's supposed to be.
Apparently, according to the LA Times, where you work, it reads like a Shakespearean drama on steroids, whatever that is.
Yeah. Sorry. What can I say? I am an imperfect woman, just alone here in my office, you know, choosing what I like. And this is, I think something that's really important for everyone who listens or watches to remember is that there's no way one critic choose everything correctly or ever describe, the book that you want to read. So that's why I think book sections like the New York Times and the Washington Post, et cetera, that have staffs and have book editors and have people who discuss things. That's so important because sometimes a single person reading is going to choose the wrong book for Andrew Keene.
No, there is no wrong book for Andrew Keene, except of course for Thomas Chatterton, whatever his name is, Thomas Chatterton Williams. Maybe we should get rid of his middle name, Some of Our Discontent. Finally, I'm going to be particularly unfair with you, Bethanne. You're always such a good spirit and so generous in your time and energy, and even putting up with my obnoxious remarks. We've done 10 nonfiction books over the last couple of shows. The Sisterhood of Ravensbrück, Murderland, the CIA Book Club, They Poison the World, Mother Emanuel, The Dry Season, which we just talked about, Some of Our Discontent, of course, Lone Wolf, That's How They Get You, and Empire of AI. Not everyone has your time to read these books. So give me one book that you would suggest, and it's not allowed to be Summer of Our Discontent because that's often.
Oh, no, I won't choose that. But if there were one book on here, it would be Empire of AI.
Wow. We're going to get Karen Howe on the show, and we're going to refer to that. Thank you so much, Bethanne. Keep reading, and maybe we'll do a show over the summer about fiction. We always have great conversations because when we're on the beach, we like reading fiction rather than nonfiction. Keep reading, Bethanne, and we'll talk again in the not too distant future. Thanks, you so much.
Bye.